When I was a kid, my grandpa had this dog named Bango, and he was working with my dad in the oil field. There was a hole in the bottom of an oil tank, but he goes, "Get that high lift jack out there and jack that tank up. And we'll look under and see how bad that hole is. Maybe we can plug it up with an old sock or something." And we start jacking that thing up, and under there's a groundhog. And that groundhog looks up, and Bango takes off. And his tail hits that high lift jack release switch. Bong! That tank falls, it's empty, and it rings like a bell. Bong! We're all standing there, and Grandpa, he turns and goes, "Bango!" But Bango didn't even bark when that thing hit him. That's how quick it was.
Did you lift it back up?
No.
You just left it.
Bango plugged the hole. And that's how I want to go, like Bango. These are lies the way I remember them. I was hunting for Christmas presents when I was like 12 or 13, and my dad had a banjo under his bed that I found. For some reason, he's like, "No, whatever you do, boy, I don't want to catch you playing that banjo." And I was like, "Oh." And of course, it was a trick, you know. And every time he was out of the house, I'd be in there, and then like after a year, I secretly got good. My mother was kind of a musician. She kind of knew what to do. But then my brother started playing guitar, and then I got a sister started playing the fiddle. I got 3 sisters. All younger, and they all 3 played the violin. My dad played the mandolin, my mom played the bass, and started playing bluegrass music. So Dad was an old money dog, and what he'd do is
What's a money dog?
he wanted that money. And he would,
You say money dog like I'm supposed to know what I'm.
oh, everybody knows a money dog. That's a money dog. Oh! We would play festivals on the weekend, real shows, and then he figured out that at retirement villages, you could call in and they had an entertainment budget. So he'd say, "We got kids, acoustic instruments, old-time music, $500. And he'd take that money and he'd go, "Ew," and I never saw a dime of it. We're at this old folks home full of retired Elvis impersonators because of, you know, Vegas. Everybody there was actually in pretty good shape, except they wheeled out a gurney with this old lady on it. And she was like 100. And her daughter was there, and her daughter was like 60, 70. We're just playing music. And all of a sudden, there's a little commotion. And she's kind of like, the daughter's going. And everybody on stage is like, "Ew." It's like you cannot look at anything, because everyone else is just kind of going like
And
this.
she's like
But
shaking.
here it's like their action is. And kind of the way it's set up, the crowd's not really seeing it, but we're all like, you know, and we're singing about how mountain girls can kiss, you know, or whatever we're doing. And we're all looking. She runs away. Here comes a doctor, like with a stethoscope. Shines that light in the eye. She goes to the daughter. And we're all there like, "All right." These guys in scrubs come out to haul her away. And the daughter's like, "No. And like, let her," and I kind of get what she's saying, "Let her listen to these kids." They're singing about crap. And there's this dead body laying there, and there she sat for the rest of the show. Okay, well, let's do a spiritual. I remember that's what Dad said. Well, my mom was like, "They'll be shouting on the hills of glory." That was the song my oldest sister sang, and it's about going to heaven. And we're like, crank her up. And let me tell you, nobody played that at a better time than us playing it for that lady who just went on to meet her maker right then. So my grandma, she goes to looking up our family heritage. And the first thing she finds out is I'm a descendant of the deadliest confirmed kill gunslinger. And I think he had like 41 confirmed kills, but he's like, "I might have killed 100 people. But he was famous for sleeping at a campfire, and the guy across the campfire is really sawing logs, you know, like, and he just gets up, pulls that hog leg, sends him to his maker, lays right back down, goes to sleep. He shot a man just for snoring. That was our most recent murder and rapist that I'm descended from.
What's his name?
John Wesley Harden. And my mom's last name's Harden, and he was from Oklahoma here. I mean, crooks have always really inspired me. Lake Eufaula was made in the early 70s maybe, early 70s, late 60s. And my uncle had this system called trot lining, where he would like hang a cable between, because it filled up like a huge forested area. And he'd get at the top of 2 trees and he'd hang a big old cable and he'd put like 10, 20 hooks hanging off of it with a piece of meat. And the next day there'd be 10, 20 catfish on there. You know, the movie Urban Cowboy had come out and everybody wanted to be a cowboy. And in New York at the finest restaurants, they had fried catfish on the menu. And they had Oklahoma caught fried catfish because he would ice that up and he would ship it all over the country and he'd like run it somehow. And the dang game warden caught him. And like every great criminal, it ends up being taxes, but they sent him to federal penitentiary. And when he got out, he went right back fishing out of that Eufaula, dude. He kept it up, dude. He was rich, man. Richer than Davy Crockett.
So what did he do with all the money? Because he had the $3 million or something.
You don't worry about that money.
Something's burning back there.
So Granny's like, she keeps looking and she's like, I wonder how the Hardens come to America. And it turns out on the pirate Sir Walter Drake's pirate ship, they were running from the British. Big old boat full of murderers and rapists this time. They were running from the English and they ran her aground in Louisiana. Everybody jumped off like rats, and that's how we come to America. When I first saw her, I was gonna meet another girl for a date. And my guy I was with her going on a double date. He was gonna take her roommate on a date. And he goes, man, would you marry this gal we're gonna go on a date with? And I'm like, no! And he goes, what kind of gal would you marry? And Jill was laying on the floor with her boyfriend at the time, and I go, I'd marry that gal right there. And she looks up like, that was the first time we ever laid eyes on each other. That's a true story. And it was like a year later we started dating.
And all of her friends hated you.
Oh yeah, well, who would like a guy like me? Really a very average fellow. Subpar in many ways, actually. So we're playing this show, the Mercury Lounge here in town. And we're waiting for our money like at 2 a.m. and there's only people left for the real barflies, you know. And this guy who had sat there the whole night and he was cheering in the crowd and he goes, I'm a nationally ranked axe thrower and I go to the opening of axe throwing places and I do an exhibition and they pay me. And the bartender goes, prove it. And somebody gets one of them 50-gallon trash cans and like puts it on its side. And he takes one of them bottles off the bar, he paces it out and he goes, and he slings it underhand, and it's like a laser. Right in the dead center, just boom, hits the back of it, like so fast. And we're like, dang, dude, what are you doing here? And he's like, oh, I got a Tinder date coming. It's 2 a.m., and sure enough, this gal comes to the door of the bar. She opens it up, and he walks up to her and jumps up. You know, it's like this. Here, look, hold your arm out. No, look, put your arm out.
Me.
No, hold your arm out.
Like that.
What? Like that, dude. And she just said nothing. Carried her mind. Dad loved this one where I get this speeding ticket and I'm going like 30 over. So I go to court and I wear the most disgusting oil-filled clothes I have. Overalls, holes in them, covered in oil. I get there at 8 a.m. and I got the baby in a carrier. She's like 6 months old. The baby's like, meep. And the judge is standing there and there's probably 30 people trying to contest tickets. And he's like, who got that baby? And I'm like, I'm not saying anything because I thought he was gonna kick me out or something. And the guy next to me is like, points at me.
Points you out.
He goes, you, sir, you're up first. Do you plead not guilty, guilty, or no contest? And I was like, what's the difference between guilty and no contest? And he's like writing, and he just looks up at me like, in your own words, just say why you're here. And I say, Your Honor, I am here to appeal to your good nature on account of my impoverished state. Look, if you don't get a ticket in 6 months, you won't have to pay this one. And then he goes, son, the court fee today is $35. Can you pay it? And I went, y'all take credit card? He goes, yes. I go, well, then I think I can. I told Dad, and he's like, I love it. I hate the government. He's just like all the time hating on that government. But one of his greatest scams that I ever saw, he's buying a piece of oil field equipment and there's a boom on and everything's really expensive. It's like 2006. I'm 16. And I'm with him in this oil field supply store and he goes, I need this water and gas separator.
And the guy's like, it's probably a $2,500 piece of equipment. And the guy, old Keith, and he's like, Andy, that'd be $5,000. So he's like charging him double. And my dad knows the guy's trying to charge him double. And he goes, I'll tell you what. He's sitting there with all his cronies, the guy, Keith. He goes, I'll pay $10,000 or you give it to me for free on a coin toss. And of course, he's not going to back down in front of all his cronies. And my dad flips it. The guy calls it in the air. He takes it, slaps it on his wrist, and my dad won it. And he loaded up that equipment and he pulled it right out. Here's something he taught me later. Okay, you see that? Call it in the air.
Heads.
You can win every time if you know how to do it.
So he had a trick on how to flip the coin.
I don't know. I don't know. He showed me that. I gotta check that pizza. We played this show in Tucumcari, New Mexico called Rockabilly on the Route. We get out and it's this big mob. Everybody's like together. Like there's maybe only like 100 or 120, but it was like in a room. It felt like people were like shoulder to shoulder in this room. And this guy, big old local guy, looks like he just got off work at Foot Locker. Big old guy, and he's like, y'all got any cocaine? I'm like, no way, man. And I just, as a joke, I point to the drummer, and he's like, I'm like, that guy does. He told me you got cocaine. And I was like, and he's like, no, man. And as a joke, he points to a guy going into his room. He goes, that guy's got cocaine. And it was another musician, right? And so that guy goes over and he's like, bang, 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 bang. And we're all like, ugh. People are kind of getting spooked. And then you hear this yelling and shouting and screaming and scuffling. And sure enough, there's a fist fight going on outside. And in the middle of the scrum, there stands Foot Locker hunting his cocaine, right? We're all in this one room, and there's two rooms on each side, husband and wife. Everybody's awake. We're all looking out the window. And that guy has got blood all over him. And he's got a knife. And he's walking around the parking lot like this. Face me, cowards! Suddenly, like as we're talking about like, oh, this guy's drunk, this guy's high, whatever, let's not worry about this guy. I was like, let's bar the door, and we get the chair in there, and he comes up and he turns our knob. And we got like, the 3 locks locked. And we're sitting there like, oh my gosh, because there's a big picture window. Huge, big as this window in the hotel room, with just that little sheet over it. And we're standing there like, he come through that window and just kill us. What are we gonna do? In the safe, I had my handgun. And I go open the safe, and I hold it out to him. And let me tell you, there was a Democrat that day thinking his lucky stars that he was looking at a hillbilly with a handgun. And then I hear it, bang! He had stabbed a fire extinguisher glass cover between our 2 rooms. And I was like, I was getting the gun out. I was like, it's time, I'm ready to start blasting. I'm getting a little excited. And it's right then the police show up. And he starts walking out to the parking lot, throwing little baggies out of his pants. And I hear something that I hadn't been hearing all night. To this point, I hear someone go, buck, 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 chicken! And then he turns around and goes, cowards! Face me! And it was the drummer, had that whole time, would crack the door and go, buck, 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 to that dude. And he was gonna kill us. They wrestled him to the ground, cigarette still burning, and they hauled his butt to jail. And we all slept like dogs that night, I tell you. All right, so 15 years ago, I worked a night shift at a Walgreens here in town at 31st and Harvard. And I'd get there at like 10 at night and get out of there at like 7 in the morning, something like that. There were people that I saw all the time. There was a guy I called Conan the Barbarian. He was a cook at the Village Inn. And he would watch Conan the Barbarian, and he'd done it every night for 10 years. And he said he missed one night because he was in the hospital with pneumonia. That's how I knew he was telling the truth. And he was just, he was kind of squirrely, to say the least. And I talked to that guy every night that summer. And there was a dude who would come in maybe once a week, and he would, if I was alone, he'd just say hi, and then he'd go about his business. But if there was somebody checking out at that time, he would click his heels together, Nazi salute, and yell, "Hail Satan!" And then the person checking out would be like, I think would turn and look at him, and then he would be looking at me, and he would say, "Oh, right. Are you a believer or what, dude? You're not gonna hail Satan me just because there's someone here? What a fraud! What a hack! What a poser!" And then he would like goose step onto his business. He did that more than once, and I called him Lucifer. There was a bunch of bad stuff in there where people were coming in to buy ingredients for meth, and one of my managers was a wannabe policeman, and he took all the ingredients to meth and put it on one kiosk. And that night, a guy comes in and he's like, "Oh yeah, I need these lithium batteries. And, oh look, these instant ice packs are right here." And then he sees the third ingredient, and he's like, when he sees 3 ingredients on one kiosk, he's like, he backs away, buys nothing, never comes back to the store. So in the oil field, there was this legendary woman named Vicky. And she was like the only female oil field worker I'd ever come across in my life. And by the time I came across her, like her golden years were like we were right there in the golden years of Vicky's activity. And there were grown men who worked on drilling rigs. When they heard that she was coming, they would hide. Because she would get all over and be like, "Hey, you looking pretty good." And she was like scary. I had this hole in this oil tank, and there's a hole in the bottom, and I said, "Will you come out here and pick it up and take it back to your shop and weld a new bottom on there?" And she comes out there, and there was all this sediment from the old oil. It was like a foot deep, and I just drained it out, drained all the oil out, and I was like, "We're good," but it was like goo, so it didn't drain out. And there was like a ton, literally thousands of pounds of this goo in the bottom of this oil tank. She's like, and it's called basalt sediments. People call it BS. And she goes, "There's BS in the bottom of this tank. I thought you said you drained this tank." "Oh, I thought I did, Becky." And she's cussing me out. And she goes, "Well, you're a liar. All men are liars." And she's going on, "Are you just too stupid to know how to drain an oil tank? Or are you a liar?" I said, "Well, ma'am." And when I said ma'am, she went, because I think it'd been a while since somebody
Called her
said ma'am. "I'm just ignorant. I don't know." And she goes, "You get your BS hauler to come out here and you go down a thief hole with the hose and you suck it out." So "I'm sorry, next time I'll know." She goes, "Oh, I hate dealing with this BS." But she winched it up, took it and left. A few years later, I heard she had an oil tank on the back of a big long semi-trailer, and it was on its side, like a big old round tank. And she was unchaining it, and she had this perfectly flat yard where she did all her business, but it was like she had parked with one tire in a little divot, and it was like a 1% grade. And when she got it unchained, it was rolling imperceptibly slow, like, and she was getting another chain, and she was doing business and bending over and working. And while she was working, it just rolled off, smashed her, caught her right here, smashed her legs and her, her body up to her sternum. And she was still alive when it rolled off of her. And her brother was there in the yard doing something else, and he ran over, and she was still alive. And she talked to him for a minute. And what she said was, "You cut up that tank. Don't sell it to anyone. Don't let it get away. Don't let the one that got me live." And that next day, he was out there with a plasma torch, and he cut that thing to bits about the size of a dinner plate. And it's still humped up in their yard, that big pile of steel. Yeah. I mean, what happened to this guy, it kind of defies explanation. But you hear about people doing things where they got to have some plastic surgery or something, or they got to change something about themselves that you think, "Hey man, the juice ain't worth the squeeze on this. This ain't gonna satisfy you." But my mind kind of got changed about it, because there was this guy named Lefty who worked on a frac crew, and they would do cement. He would say what we're gonna do. He's got the plan, He's like, "All right, well, we're gonna get this well fracked. We're gonna put 10,000 pounds of sand down there. We're gonna chase it with acid. Then I'm gonna get my arm cut off, and we're all gonna be good." And he said that multiple times when he'd be on one job. To me, a guy I don't know, And the guys he worked with, they didn't hear it anymore, because for years he had said this. He went to dozens of doctors all across the country, and he says, "Hey, my arm, something's wrong with that, and he get cut off." And he'd kind of get in there, and he would lie. He would say, I don't really know the details of exactly what he was doing, but he would get a reason to go see a doctor and say, "Maybe I need this arm cut off." And they'd be like, "There's nothing wrong with you. You need to see a psychologist. You need to see a psychiatrist. You probably take a pill, and you're not going to worry about your arm anymore." And he goes, I don't want this arm here anymore. I need this arm cut off. And then I'm going to be okay. And people didn't really know what to do. He never sought psychological help. He lived in a teeny tiny town up in Kansas. And I remember he went to Mexico. But he goes down there and that doctor says that everybody else is. He's like, Lefty, you're sick. Like, there's nothing wrong with that arm. You're using that arm. Keep that arm on you. And they sent him back home. And that was kind of the last straw for Lefty. And he took a week off of work. And he went home that night. And he took his forearm and he put it in a vise. And he took a saw and he cut off his arm in the middle of his bicep. And he tourniqueted it and he cauterized the wound on a hot iron. And he drove himself to the emergency room. And at the emergency room, of course, they just sewed it up. You know, there's nothing they could do. He said, oh, I lost my arm, it got cut off. But it was at home still in that vise. And after them 9 days, that Friday to that Monday, he came back to work. And he never mentioned it again. People looked at him and said, Lefty. And he said, that's all over now. Let's go to work. And he never brought it up again. It's a crazy world, ain't it?
It's not so bad.
Riding tonight in a high cold wind on the trail of the old lonesome pine. Thinking of you, feeling so blue, and darling, why'd you leave me behind? Well, get down, boys, go back home, back to the one you love. Treat her right, never wrong, how mountain girls can love.
That's freaking awesome, dude.